Two friends, Mark and Daniel, had been inseparable since childhood. Their small town was nestled on the edge of an ancient forest, which was rumored to be haunted. Despite their parents' warnings, the boys often ventured into the woods, drawn by its eerie allure. One chilly autumn evening, Mark stumbled upon an old, decrepit house deep within the forest. The house seemed abandoned, its windows shattered, and the wooden walls covered in thick ivy. Curious and eager for adventure, the boys decided to explore. Inside, the air was stale, and the floor creaked with every step. Cobwebs adorned the corners, and the dim light from their flashlights cast eerie shadows on the walls. In the center of the living room, they found a large, ornate mirror, covered in dust. Its frame was intricately carved with strange symbols, unlike anything they had ever seen. "Look at this," Mark said, wiping away the dust to reveal the mirror's surface. As they peered into the mirror, their reflections seemed distorted, their faces twisted and contorted. Suddenly, the room grew colder, and a chilling wind blew through the broken windows. "We should leave," Daniel said, feeling a knot of fear tighten in his stomach. But Mark was mesmerized. "It's just a mirror," he said, though his voice wavered. That night, both boys had disturbing dreams. Mark saw himself standing before the mirror, unable to move, while shadowy figures danced around him, whispering in an unknown language. Daniel dreamt of the house itself, its walls closing in on him, suffocating him. Over the following days, Mark became increasingly obsessed with the mirror. He insisted they return to the house, claiming he needed to understand its power. Reluctantly, Daniel agreed, not wanting to abandon his friend. Upon their return, the mirror seemed to pulse with a dark energy. Mark reached out to touch it, and as his fingers brushed the glass, the room was plunged into darkness. When the lights returned, Mark was gone, and Daniel stood alone, his friend's reflection still visible in the mirror, pounding on the glass and screaming silently. Panicked, Daniel fled the house and ran to the town's old librarian, Mrs. Whitmore, known for her knowledge of local legends. She listened intently as Daniel recounted the events, her face growing pale. "The mirror of shadows," she whispered. "It traps the soul of anyone who touches it, imprisoning them in a world of darkness." Desperate to save his friend, Daniel asked if there was a way to free Mark. Mrs. Whitmore hesitated before revealing an old, tattered book that spoke of a ritual. It required a personal item from the trapped soul and a willing sacrifice. Determined, Daniel returned to the house with Mark's favorite baseball cap and the book in hand. As he stood before the mirror, he could see Mark's terrified face, mouthing words he couldn't hear. Following the ritual's instructions, Daniel placed the cap at the mirror's base and recited the incantation. The mirror began to glow, and the shadows within swirled violently. Suddenly, a force pulled Daniel toward the glass, but he held his ground, repeating the incantation louder. With a final, blinding flash, Mark was ejected from the mirror, collapsing to the floor. But something was wrong. Mark's eyes were void of recognition, and he began to laugh maniacally. The shadows had followed him, infecting his mind. As the room darkened, Daniel realized with horror that the ritual had only released the darkness within his friend. The last thing Daniel saw before the shadows consumed him was Mark's twisted smile, now a puppet of the malevolent force they had unleashed. In the silence that followed, the mirror stood untouched, waiting for its next victims, while the house resumed its vigil, a beacon of darkness in the heart of the ancient forest.